England, 1805. The morning room of Ashwell Park caught the early sunlight through tall windows that overlooked 300 acres of carefully tended parkland. The estate sat in the gentle hills of Kent, 3 hours by carriage in fair weather from the clamour of London, its pale stone walls and symmetrical wings embodying the classical elegance favoured by the previous generation. Inside, the house maintained an atmosphere of refined comfort, though careful observers might notice the subtle signs of economical management. Fewer servants than a ducal residence typically employed. Certain rooms kept shuttered, a general air of quiet preservation rather than lavish display. In the corner of this morning room, positioned to catch the best light without being immediately visible from the doorway, sat Miss Clarissa Whitmore. At 24, she occupied that peculiar position in aristocratic households, reserved for impoverished gentlewomen, neither servant nor family, existing in the liminal space between stairs. Her gown of dove-grey merino wool was well made but several seasons old, the modest lace at her collar and cuffs carefully maintained through her own needlework. Her hair, a shade of golden blonde that might have drawn admiration in a ballroom, was dressed simply and pinned at the nape of her neck in a style that suggested practicality over fashion. She bent over a writing desk, her green eyes focused on the ledger before her as she transcribed household accounts in a neat, precise hand. The scratch of her pen provided a gentle counterpoint to the ticking of the mantel clock and the distant sounds of the house awakening to its daily routines. 3 years had passed since Clarissa had come to Ashwell Park as companion to the Dowager Duchess of Northmere. 3 years since the death of her father, Viscount Whitmore, had extinguished that minor title forever. As an only child, and the sole offspring of a man whose gambling debts had consumed 2 estates and a respectable fortune, Clarissa had watched her world contract with devastating speed. The viscountcy, lacking male heirs, had reverted to the crown. The principal estate had been sold to satisfy creditors. The smaller properties had followed. Her mother, Lady Margaret Whitmore, had survived her husband by mere months, her constitution broken by the twin blows of loss and disgrace. It was Lady Margaret's final act of maternal devotion that had secured Clarissa's current position. The late Viscountess had been a distant cousin to the Dowager Duchess, and in the weeks before her death, had written a letter that combined dignity with desperate plea. The Dowager, a woman of considerable perception and surprising generosity, had responded with an offer. Clarissa would come to Ashwell Park as her companion, a position that provided modest compensation, comfortable lodgings, and most importantly, respectability. Clarissa set down her pen and flexed her fingers, studying the accounts she had just completed. The Dowager's jointure was substantial, but not unlimited, and Clarissa had learned to manage the household expenses with careful efficiency that stretched every pound without compromising comfort or appearance. It was work she found satisfying, this quiet competence that kept the machinery of daily life running smoothly. The door opened, and Mrs. Pemberley, the housekeeper, entered with her usual brisk step. A woman of 50, with iron-grey hair and a face that could express volumes without uttering a word. She had initially regarded Clarissa with the suspicion housekeepers reserved for any change in household routine. 3 years had softened that suspicion into something approaching respect. "Miss Whitmore," she said, her tone neutral but not unkind. "Her Grace is asking for you. She wishes to review the menu for His Grace's arrival tomorrow." Clarissa rose, closing the ledger carefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Pemberley. I shall attend her directly. She's in her private sitting room," the housekeeper added, then paused. "Miss Whitmore, if I may, the accounts you prepared last quarter, Her Grace was most pleased. Said you had a head for figures that many a steward might envy." The compliment, rare from the practical Mrs. Pemberley, brought a faint warmth to Clarissa's cheeks. "You are kind to say so." "Not kindness, miss. Simple truth." Mrs. Pemberley nodded once and departed, leaving Clarissa to gather the necessary papers before making her way through the familiar corridors of Ashwell Park. The house had been built some 60 years prior by the 3rd Duke of Northmere, a man of refined taste and considerable fortune. The public rooms reflected that heritage, high ceilings adorned with plasterwork depicting classical scenes, walls hung with portraits of long-dead Gravesends, furniture that combined comfort with elegance. But it was the private apartments that Clarissa had come to know most intimately, the smaller rooms where actual life transpired beyond the formal pageantry of aristocratic existence. The Dowager Duchess's sitting room occupied a sunny corner of the east wing. Unlike the somewhat austere grandeur of the staterooms, this space reflected its occupant's personality. Comfortable chairs arranged for conversation, shelves lined with well-read books, watercolours painted by the Dowager's own hand adorning the walls. A fire burned cheerfully in the grate despite the relatively mild spring weather, testament to the Dowager's susceptibility to chill since the rheumatic fever that had nearly claimed her life 5 years earlier. The Dowager herself sat in her favourite chair near the window, a shawl of fine cashmere draped across her shoulders. Lady Henrietta Gravesend had been considered a beauty in her youth, and at 60 she retained a handsome countenance, high cheekbones, and intelligent grey eyes, giving her face character that mere prettiness could never achieve. Her dark hair, now liberally streaked with silver, was dressed in a style that suggested elegance without vanity. "Clarissa, my dear," she said, her voice retaining the clear tones of her youth despite her years. "Come sit with me. Mrs. Pemberley tells me you've been labouring over those accounts since dawn. You'll ruin your eyes." Clarissa settled into the chair opposite, arranging her skirts with unconscious grace. "The light is excellent in the morning room, Your Grace, and the accounts balance perfectly this month, I'm pleased to report." "You're a treasure," the Dowager replied warmly. "I shudder to think how I managed before you came. My previous companion, dear Miss Foster, was a lovely woman but couldn't add 2 figures together to save her life." She paused, studying Clarissa with those perceptive eyes. "Though I suspect you don't think of yourself as a treasure at all." Clarissa felt the familiar constriction in her chest that came whenever the conversation turned toward her circumstances. "I'm grateful for the position, Your Grace, more than I can adequately express. For gratitude is not the same as happiness, my dear." The Dowager's tone was gentle but direct. "You're 24, accomplished, well-bred, and you spend your days managing an old woman's household and reading to her when her eyes grow tired. It's not the life your parents envisioned for you." For a moment, Clarissa considered dissembling, offering the platitudes that smoothed over uncomfortable truths. But the Dowager deserved better than that. They had developed, over 3 years, a relationship that transcended the formal boundaries of their respective positions. "No," she admitted quietly, "it is not. But it is the life circumstances have provided, and I have learned there is dignity in accepting what cannot be changed." The Dowager's expression softened further. "You have more dignity in your smallest finger than most women possess in their entire being. But dignity should not preclude hope, Clarissa. You're still young." "Young by whose measure, Your Grace?" Clarissa managed a small smile. "I am past the age when most women marry. I have no fortune, no connections beyond your kindness, and no prospects. These are facts, not complaints. I have made my peace with them." Before the Dowager could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. A footman entered, bowing slightly. "Your Grace, a message from London. His Grace the Duke will arrive tomorrow afternoon as planned." "Thank you, Thomas." The Dowager waited until the footman had withdrawn before turning back to Clarissa. "Alexander makes his monthly inspection of the estate. We should review the menu, as I mentioned, and ensure the house is prepared to his standards." Clarissa heard the slight edge in the Dowager's voice when she spoke of her elder son. The relationship between mother and son was cordial, but not warm, a fact that had become apparent to Clarissa over the years. Alexander Gravesend, Duke of Northmere, was a man of rigid principles and exacting standards, devoted to duty in a way that left little room for softer emotions. "Of course, Your Grace." Clarissa retrieved the menu she had prepared earlier from her folio. "I've taken the liberty of planning the week's meals. His Grace prefers simplicity, so I've kept a traditional English fare with perhaps 1 French dish for variety." They spent the next hour reviewing domestic arrangements, the Dowager offering occasional suggestions, but largely approving Clarissa's careful planning. It was work that Clarissa found oddly soothing, this ordering of daily life into manageable tasks and schedules. There was comfort in competence, in knowing exactly what was expected and meeting those expectations with quiet efficiency. The following afternoon arrived with the punctuality that characterized all of Alexander Gravesend's movements. Clarissa, having ensured that every detail of the house was in perfect order, positioned herself in the Dowager's sitting room where she would be available if needed, but not conspicuously present for the Duke's arrival. Through the window, she watched the ducal carriage sweep up the curved drive, pulled by a matched team of bays that spoke of both wealth and taste. The vehicle came to a halt before the main entrance, and moments later, Alexander emerged. Even from this distance, his presence commanded attention. At 2:30, he stood well over 6 feet, his broad shoulders and upright posture suggesting both physical strength and unwavering certainty. His hair, so dark it appeared nearly black in the afternoon light, was cut in a style that suggested fashion without vanity. His features were strong rather than handsome, a firm jaw and straight nose, giving his face a quality of severe elegance that some might find intimidating. Clarissa had seen the Duke perhaps a dozen times in 3 years, always from a respectful distance. He spent the majority of his time in London or at his other estates, visiting Ashwell Park monthly to review accounts and ensure the Dowager's comfort. During these visits, he acknowledged Clarissa with the same distant courtesy he might extend to any household servant, a nod of recognition that conveyed neither interest nor disdain, merely the appropriate degree of notice for someone of her position. She had long since ceased to feel any particular emotion about this treatment. It was, after all, exactly what her station warranted. The Duke of Northmere moved in spheres far removed from impoverished companions, and Clarissa had learned not to expect or desire acknowledgement from those who inhabited worlds she could no longer access. "Clarissa!" The Dowager's voice drew her attention from the window. "Alexander will want to see me before dinner. Perhaps you could ensure the library is prepared. He likes to work there in the evenings, and I know he finds comfort in having everything arranged just so." "Of course, Your Grace." Clarissa rose, grateful for the task that would keep her occupied and, more importantly, out of the Duke's immediate vicinity during his reunion with his mother. The library at Ashwell Park was Clarissa's favourite room in the house, a 2-story space lined with thousands of volumes collected over generations. Tall windows on the south wall flooded the room with light during the day, while comfortable chairs arranged near the massive fireplace provided perfect reading spots during the long winter evenings. The smell of leather bindings and aging paper created an atmosphere that Clarissa found more soothing than any perfume. She moved through the familiar space, ensuring the Duke's preferred desk was clear and supplied with fresh paper and ink, that the decanter of brandy on the side table was filled, that the fire was laid ready for lighting should the evening grow cool. It was work she had performed many times before, invisible labour that kept the household functioning smoothly. As she worked, her mind drifted to the letters she had sent 3 months earlier. In moments of quiet desperation, when the weight of her invisible existence had grown particularly heavy, Clarissa had written to 2 agencies in London that specialised in placing governesses and companions. The responses had been prompt and professional. One agency had informed her that positions were limited for women of her age, without extensive references. The other, Mrs. Blackwell's registry, had been more encouraging, noting that several families sought educated women capable of instructing older children and managing household correspondence. Clarissa had not pursued these inquiries further, held back by loyalty to the Dowager and the knowledge that her current position, however limiting, provided security that many women in her circumstances could never hope to achieve. But the letters remained filed carefully in her private writing desk, a reminder that options existed, however constrained, should circumstances change. Dinner that evening followed the familiar pattern of the Duke's visits. The meal was served in the smaller dining room, a concession to the intimate nature of the gathering. Alexander sat at the head of the table, the Dowager to his right, and Clarissa in her customary place further down, close enough to be included should the Dowager require assistance, but far enough removed to observe the proprieties of rank. The Duke spoke primarily of business matters, updates on his London properties, discussions of agricultural improvements he was considering for his northern estates. questions about the management of Ashwell Park. His voice was deep and measured, each word chosen with the precision of a man who considered language a tool rather than an art. He addressed his mother with formal courtesy, inquiring after her health and comfort with the dutiful concern of a responsible son. He did not address Clarissa at all. This was not cruelty, Clarissa understood. It was simply the natural order of things. She was present to assist the Dowager, to provide companionship and practical support, not to participate in conversations between a duke and his mother. Alexander's gaze passed over her, as it might pass over a piece of furniture, acknowledging her presence only in the most abstract sense. After dinner, the Dowager retired early, claiming fatigue, though Clarissa suspected she wished to give her son time to work undisturbed in the library. Clarissa helped her into bed, ensuring she had water and her book close at hand, banking the fire to provide warmth without excessive heat. "He barely looked at you," the Dowager said as Clarissa adjusted the bed covers. "Alexander, I mean. Not even a direct word during the entire meal." Clarissa smoothed an invisible wrinkle from the counterpane. "He has no reason to address me, Your Grace. I am here to serve you, not to engage in conversation with your son. You deserve better than invisibility, my dear. I have learned to find contentment in useful occupation, Your Grace. That is enough." The Dowager's expression suggested she wanted to say more, but fatigue won out. Clarissa extinguished all but one candle and withdrew quietly, leaving the older woman to her rest. Rather than retiring to her own room, Clarissa found herself drawn to the library. It was her habit, when the house grew quiet, to spend an hour or two reading before bed. She had assumed the Duke would have finished his work and retired by now, but as she approached the partially open door, she heard the scratch of pen on paper that indicated his continued presence. She should have turned back, sought her book another time, avoided any possibility of awkward encounter, but the library held such solace for her, and the Duke would hardly notice one companion retrieving a volume from the shelves. She entered quietly, her soft slippers making no sound on the carpeted floor. Alexander sat at the large desk, his back to the door, bent over what appeared to be correspondence. The candlelight cast his profile in sharp relief, emphasizing the strong line of his jaw and the concentration in his posture. Clarissa moved silently toward the section of shelving where she had left off in her current volume of poetry, hoping to retrieve it without disturbing him. She had just located the book when his voice broke the silence, startling her. "Does my mother sleep well?" Clarissa turned, book clutched to her chest, to find him still facing away from her. For a moment, she wondered if he was addressing someone else, but they were alone in the room. "Yes, Your Grace," she replied, her voice steady despite her surprise. She was tired this evening, but comfortable. He nodded once, a gesture she could see in the reflection of the dark window glass before him, and returned to his writing without further comment. Clarissa took this as dismissal and moved toward the door, grateful to escape without further interaction. But as she reached the threshold, his voice stopped her again. "Miss Whitmore." She turned back, surprise quickening her pulse. He had never addressed her by name before. "Your Grace? My mother speaks highly of your management of household affairs. I wish to acknowledge your competence." It was said without turning, without warmth, a simple statement of fact delivered to the empty air before him. But it was acknowledgement nonetheless, perhaps the first time in 3 years that Alexander Gravesend had directly recognized her existence. "Thank you, Your Grace," Clarissa managed, then withdrew quickly before the moment could become any more uncomfortable. In the safety of her own small room, Clarissa set the book on her bedside table and moved to the window. Her chamber overlooked the gardens, and in the moonlight she could see the carefully tended paths winding between flowering shrubs and early roses. Beyond lay the park, stretching into darkness, beautiful and vast and utterly beyond her reach. She had built a life here, small and circumscribed, but not without meaning. The Dowager valued her. The servants respected her competence, and she had achieved a measure of security that her ruined family name might otherwise have denied her. It was not the life she had once imagined, not the future her parents had envisioned when they had sent her to finishing school and dressed her for her first season. But it was her life, and she had made it bearable through dignity and acceptance, and the small pleasures she allowed herself, a good book, a walk in the gardens, the satisfaction of work done well. 3 years of invisibility had taught her that some women were destined to exist on the margins, supporting the lives of others, while their own remained quietly unnoticed. Clarissa had accepted this truth and built her peace around it. She could not know that in a matter of days, everything she had accepted would be challenged by the return of a man who would see her when his brother never had. The arrival of Christopher Gravesend came with the kind of energy that Ashwell Park had not felt in years. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after Alexander's last visit, when the sound of hooves on gravel drew Clarissa to the morning room window. A single rider approached the house at a pace that suggested enthusiasm rather than urgency, mounted on a handsome chestnut gelding that tossed its head with spirit. The rider dismounted with easy athleticism, tossing the reins to a groom who had hurried from the stables, and bounded up the front steps with vigour that seemed almost foreign to the measured dignity of Ashwell Park. Clarissa could not see the visitor's face from her angle, but she heard the commotion in the entrance hall, the exclamations of surprised servants, and most tellingly, the dowager's cry of genuine delight that echoed through the corridors. "Christopher, my dear boy, why did you not send word?" Curiosity overcame propriety, and Clarissa moved to the doorway of the morning room, positioning herself where she could observe without intruding. The man who stood in the entrance hall, embracing the dowager with unself-conscious affection, bore a clear family resemblance to Alexander, yet possessed an entirely different demeanour. He was perhaps an inch or two shorter than his brother, his build more wiry than broad, his movements characterized by restless energy that contrasted sharply with Alexander's controlled stillness. His hair was lighter than the Duke's, a warm chestnut brown that caught the light from the tall windows, and his face, while sharing the strong Gravesend features, held an openness that Alexander's severe countenance lacked. When he smiled, which he did frequently during those first moments of reunion, his entire face transformed with genuine warmth. "I wanted to surprise you, Mother," he said, his voice carrying the cultured accent of their class, but with a musicality that suggested humour and quick feeling. 5 years is far too long to be away from home. I've resigned my post and returned to England for good. The dowager pulled back to study her younger son, her hands on his shoulders. "You're thinner. They didn't feed you properly in Vienna. The Austrians feed one excellently, I assure you. I've simply been too busy enjoying continental life to sit still long enough to grow fat." Christopher's gaze swept the entrance hall and landed, unexpectedly, on Clarissa. "But I see things have changed at Ashwell Park. Mother, will you not introduce me to this young lady, who appears to be trying very hard to remain invisible?" Heat flooded Clarissa's cheeks as she realized she had been caught observing. She stepped back instinctively, but the dowager's voice stopped her. "Clarissa, my dear, come here. This reprobate is my younger son, Christopher. He's been serving in various diplomatic posts across Europe for the past 5 years, and apparently has forgotten all his English manners in the process." Despite the words, the dowager's tone held nothing but affection. "Christopher, this is Miss Clarissa Whitmore, my companion, and the person who actually keeps this household running smoothly." Christopher approached with easy courtesy, bowing over Clarissa's hand with a grace that somehow avoided seeming affected. "Miss Whitmore, I am delighted to make your acquaintance. Any woman who can manage my mother deserves the highest admiration." "Mr. Gravesend," Clarissa replied, executing a proper curtsy. "Welcome home, sir. Her Grace has spoken of you often. Nothing too damaging, I hope." His brown eyes held genuine amusement, and Clarissa found herself responding with a small smile, despite her usual reserve. "Only that you write excellent letters and have a deplorable tendency to send gifts that arrive broken, due to inadequate packing." Christopher laughed, a sound of such unaffected pleasure that it seemed to brighten the entire hall. "Guilty on both counts. I shall endeavour to improve my packing methods, now that I'm home permanently." The first dinner with Christopher present revealed how thoroughly his personality could alter the atmosphere of a gathering. Where Alexander's visits brought a sense of formal obligation, Christopher's presence infused the meal with warmth and animated conversation. He sat to the dowager's left, directly across from Clarissa's usual place, and seemed determined to include her in every topic of discussion. "Miss Whitmore," he said, as the second course was served. "Mother tells me you have an excellent knowledge of literature. Have you read any of the German poets? I brought back several volumes that might interest you." Clarissa, accustomed to remaining silent during meals, unless directly addressed by the Dowager, felt momentarily uncertain how to respond. "I confess my German is quite limited, sir. I have read some translations, but I suspect much is lost in the rendering." "A fair point," Christopher agreed, leaning forward with evident interest. "Though I would argue that a skilled translator can capture the essence if not the exact music of the original. Have you read Goethe's The Sorrows of Young Werther?" "I have, though I found it rather melancholy for my taste." "Ah, but that is precisely the point," Christopher said with enthusiasm. "The Germans have perfected the art of beautiful sadness. The Austrians, by contrast, prefer their emotions set to waltzes. Very different national characters, I assure you." The conversation continued in this vein throughout the meal, ranging from literature to music to observations about continental society. Christopher proved to be a gifted storyteller, relating anecdotes about his diplomatic experiences with humour and insight that made even the footmen smile as they served. The Dowager watched her son with obvious delight, occasionally interjecting her own observations, but primarily allowing him to dominate the conversation. For Clarissa, the evening held a strange quality, as though she had stepped into a different version of Ashwell Park. She was not merely present but included, her opinions solicited, and her responses met with genuine interest. Christopher treated her neither as a servant to be ignored, nor as a social inferior to be condescended to, but simply as an intelligent woman whose conversation he valued. It was, she realized, as she retired to her room that night, the first time in 3 years that she had felt truly seen. The pattern established itself over the following days. Christopher had returned to England with no immediate obligations, his diplomatic service concluded, and his future plans apparently flexible. He spent his mornings riding about the estate, reacquainting himself with lands he had not seen since his youth. His afternoons were devoted to his mother, long conversations in her sitting room that often included Clarissa. His evenings found him in the library, reading or writing correspondence, always welcoming company should Clarissa appear to select a book. "Tell me, Miss Whitmore," he said one afternoon as they walked through the gardens, the Dowager having claimed fatigue and encouraged them to take the air without her. "How did you come to be at Ashwell Park?" Mother mentioned some family connection, but was rather vague on the details. Clarissa hesitated, unused to discussing her circumstances so directly. But Christopher's manner invited confidence, and she found herself relating the story of her father's death, her mother's efforts to secure her future, and her current position as the Dowager's companion. "So you've been here 3 years, Christopher said thoughtfully when she had finished. "Entirely devoted to my mother's comfort and the household's management. That seems a rather narrow existence for a woman of your evident intelligence." "It is the existence circumstances have provided," Clarissa replied carefully. "I am grateful for it." "Gratitude and happiness are not always the same thing," Christopher observed. He paused beside a bed of early roses, their pink petals just beginning to unfold in the spring warmth. "Forgive me if I overstep, Miss Whitmore, but you seem to me a woman who has learned to accept far less than she deserves." The words touched something raw within Clarissa, but she kept her voice steady. "We must all accept the situations in which we find ourselves, Mr. Gravesend. Philosophy offers little comfort when practical matters demand attention." "Perhaps," Christopher conceded. "But I have spent 5 years observing how different societies organize themselves, and I have concluded that English rigidity regarding class and circumstance does more harm than good. A woman of your education and character should have far more options available to her." "Should and do are very different things, sir." "Indeed they are, but that doesn't make the disparity any less unjust." They walked on, the conversation shifting to lighter topics, but Clarissa found herself oddly moved by Christopher's observations. No one had questioned the justice of her circumstances in longer than she could remember. Most people, including herself, had simply accepted them as inevitable. Over the next fortnight, Christopher made himself thoroughly at home at Ashwell Park. The servants responded to his easy manner and genuine interest in their well-being. The Dowager bloomed under her son's attention, her energy seeming renewed by his presence. Though Clarissa noted with concern that the older woman still experienced episodes of extreme fatigue, particularly in the evenings, when her breathing would become slightly laboured and she would require assistance to her chambers. "Mother's health worries me," Christopher confided to Clarissa one morning as they arranged flowers in the drawing room. "She seems frailer than when I left." "The rheumatic fever left lasting effects," Clarissa explained, selecting stems with careful attention. "Dr. Harrison visits monthly and assures us that with proper rest and care, she should maintain comfortable health. But yes, she tires more easily now." "I'm grateful she has you," Christopher said. "I suspect you've been more attentive to her needs than my brother has been these past years." Clarissa kept her eyes on the flowers. "The Duke has many responsibilities. He cannot be expected to reside constantly at Ashwell Park." "No, but he might visit more than once monthly. He might show some genuine interest in Mother's well-being beyond formal inquiry." Christopher's tone held an edge Clarissa had not heard before. "Alexander has always placed duty above feeling, but sometimes I think he's forgotten how to feel at all." Before Clarissa could respond, the sound of carriage wheels on gravel drew their attention to the window. A familiar ducal crest gleamed on the door of the vehicle pulling up to the entrance. "Speak of the devil," Christopher murmured. "My brother arrives." Clarissa felt an odd flutter of apprehension, though she could not have said precisely why. Alexander's monthly visits had become routine, predictable interruptions in the quiet flow of life at Ashwell Park. Yet somehow, with Christopher now in residence, the Duke's arrival felt weighted with different significance. That evening at dinner, the contrast between the brothers became immediately apparent in ways it never had before. Alexander sat at the head of the table in his customary position, his posture rigid with the weight of ducal authority. His dark evening coat was perfectly tailored, his cravat tied with mathematical precision, his entire bearing suggesting control and measured dignity. Christopher, seated to his right, wore clothes of equal quality, but with a casual ease that made formality seem almost absurd by comparison. His cravat was slightly loosened, his posture relaxed, his manner open where Alexander's was closed. "Mother tells me you've been home a fortnight," Alexander said to his brother, after the preliminary greetings had been exchanged. "I'm surprised you did not send word to London. I could have arranged my visit to coincide with your arrival." "It was a sudden decision," Christopher replied. "I grew weary of diplomacy and decided life was too short to spend it bowing to Austrian archdukes. Your position was promising. Resignation seems hasty." Or perhaps I simply value different things than you do, brother." The Dowager intervened smoothly. "Christopher has been a wonderful tonic for my spirits, Alexander. The house feels alive again with young energy in it." She turned to Clarissa with deliberate intent. "Don't you agree, my dear?" Clarissa, who had been hoping to remain invisible during this family reunion, felt all eyes turn toward her. "Mr. Gravesend has certainly brought considerable animation to Ashwell Park, Your Grace." "Miss Whitmore is too modest," Christopher said, smiling at her with open warmth. "She has been my guide to all the changes in the estate since I left. We've had the most stimulating conversations about literature and landscape design. She has quite strong opinions about the merits of English gardens versus continental formality." Alexander's gaze moved to Clarissa, and for the first time since his arrival, he actually looked at her rather than through her. His blue eyes held a quality of attention that made her acutely self-conscious. She kept her own gaze downcast, focusing on her plate. "Indeed," Alexander said, his tone neutral, but somehow weighted. "I was not aware Miss Whitmore had interests beyond household management." "Then you have not been paying sufficient attention, brother," Christopher replied lightly. "Miss Whitmore possesses a formidable intellect. Just yesterday we discussed Wordsworth's theory of poetic composition. Her observations were quite insightful." "I'm sure they were," Alexander said, though his expression suggested he found the entire conversation somewhat bewildering. He turned back to his mother. "How have you been managing, Mother? Is Dr. Harrison satisfied with your health?" The conversation shifted to medical matters and estate business, topics that excluded Clarissa by their nature. Yet she found herself acutely aware of Alexander's presence in a way she never had been before. Perhaps it was the contrast with Christopher's warmth that made the Duke's formality seem more pronounced. Or perhaps it was simply that being acknowledged, even briefly, had made her more conscious of subsequently being ignored. Throughout the meal, Christopher continued to direct comments and questions toward Clarissa, including her in the conversation, despite Alexander's apparent confusion about why his brother would do so. The Dowager watched this dynamic with poorly concealed interest, occasionally encouraging Clarissa to share her opinions on various household matters. Alexander ate methodically, his responses to his brother's observations becoming increasingly brief. When Christopher laughed at something Clarissa said about the difficulty of managing conflicting servant schedules, Alexander's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. After dinner, when the Dowager retired and Christopher suggested a game of cards, Alexander declined with curt courtesy, stating he had correspondence requiring attention. He withdrew to the library, leaving Christopher and Clarissa in the drawing room. "He's in a mood," Christopher observed once they were alone. "Alexander dislikes anything that disrupts his ordered view of how things should be." "Perhaps my presence at dinner was inappropriate," Clarissa said quietly. "I am only your mother's companion. The Duke may feel I presume too much." "Nonsense. You have every right to dine with the family. You're not a servant, Miss Whitmore, regardless of what my brother's rigid protocol suggests." Christopher studied her thoughtfully. "Has he always treated you with such indifference?" "He treats me exactly as my position warrants," Clarissa replied. "I expect nothing more." "Perhaps you should," Christopher said softly. In the library, Alexander sat at his desk, staring at blank paper and seeing nothing. Something about the evening had profoundly unsettled him, though he could not identify precisely what. Christopher's return had altered the atmosphere of Ashwell Park in ways Alexander found vaguely disturbing. The house seemed different, charged with an energy that had not been present during his previous visits, and Miss Whitmore seemed different as well. Or perhaps it was merely that Alexander was actually noticing her for the first time. At dinner, when Christopher had addressed her repeatedly, Alexander had been struck by details he had never registered before. The way her green eyes lit with intelligence when discussing ideas, the grace of her hands as she gestured while speaking, the quiet dignity in her posture despite her modest position, the soft musical quality of her voice. She was not beautiful in the conventional sense that society admired. Her features were pleasant rather than striking, her figure modest, her dress unremarkable. Yet there was something about her that drew the eye, a quality of contained strength and quiet competence that Alexander found himself unable to stop noticing. He had passed her in corridors dozens of times over 3 years without truly seeing her. Now, after a single dinner where his brother had forced him to acknowledge her presence, Alexander could not stop thinking about green eyes and the way lamplight had caught the golden tones in her hair. The realization troubled him considerably. Alexander Gravesend prided himself on control, on mastery of his emotions and circumstances. He did not develop sudden fixations on impoverished companions. He certainly did not allow his younger brother's friendships to affect his own perceptions. Yet here he sat, unable to focus on correspondence, his mind replaying moments from dinner with obsessive detail. The way Miss Whitmore had smiled at Christopher's jest, the intelligence evident in her observations about poetry, the careful modesty with which she had deflected attention while still participating in conversation, and most disturbing of all, the ease between her and Christopher, the comfortable familiarity that suggested friendship, perhaps even deeper regard. Alexander rose abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the gardens now shrouded in darkness. This was absurd. He had no claim on Miss Whitmore's attention or affections, no reason to feel the odd tightness in his chest when Christopher made her laugh, no justification for the irritation that had simmered throughout dinner. Yet the feelings persisted, unwelcome and inexplicable. Over the next 3 days, as Alexander remained at Ashwell Park attending to estate business, he found himself increasingly aware of his brother's interactions with Miss Whitmore. They walked together in the gardens most afternoons. They sat in easy conversation in the morning room. They consulted over flowers and household arrangements with the comfortable familiarity of long acquaintance. and Alexander watched, telling himself he was simply observing household dynamics, while some part of him recognized the observation for what it truly was, jealousy of something he had never valued until his brother had shown him its worth. On his final evening, before returning to London, Alexander found himself in the drawing room after dinner, while Christopher played pianoforte and Miss Whitmore turned pages for him. They made a harmonious picture, dark head and golden bent together over the music, Christopher's fingers moving across the keys with practiced skill, while Miss Whitmore anticipated each turn with perfect timing. The Dowager sat in her chair by the fire, watching her sons and her companion with an expression that suggested considerable satisfaction. When she caught Alexander's eye, she smiled. "They suit well together, don't you think?" she said quietly. Alexander felt something sharp twist in his chest. "Do they?" Christopher has always possessed excellent judgment in his friendships, and Clarissa deserves someone who sees her clearly. The implication was unmistakable, and Alexander found he had no response. He turned his attention back to the pianoforte, watching his brother and Miss Whitmore in their shared endeavour, and felt the unfamiliar burn of regret. He had spent 3 years not seeing Clarissa Whitmore. Now that he finally saw her, his brother had already claimed the attention Alexander had been too blind to recognise he wanted. The thought followed him back to London the next morning and lingered through the weeks that followed. An uncomfortable awareness that Alexander could neither understand nor dismiss. The announcement came at breakfast one morning, delivered with the casual tone the Dowager reserved for decisions already made. "I have decided to host a ball," she said, setting down her teacup with decisive clink. It has been far too long since Ashwell Park has properly celebrated anything, and Christopher's return provides the perfect occasion. Christopher looked up from his eggs with surprised pleasure. "Mother, that's wonderfully generous, but surely the effort is exactly what this household needs," the Dowager interrupted firmly. "We have grown too quiet, too withdrawn. A ball will remind the neighbourhood that the Gravesends still know how to entertain properly." Her gaze moved to Clarissa. "My dear, I shall need your help with the arrangements, naturally. But I insist you attend as a guest, not as my companion managing details from the shadows." Clarissa felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Your Grace, I couldn't possibly—" "You can and you will. I have already commissioned a gown for you from Mrs. Hartford in the village. Blue, I think. It will suit your colouring admirably." "Mother, that's extraordinarily kind," Christopher said, his eyes warm as they met Clarissa's. "Miss Whitmore will be the most elegant lady present, I'm certain." The ball was set for 3 weeks hence, time enough for invitations to be dispatched and responses received. The household transformed into controlled chaos as preparations commenced. Clarissa found herself caught between her usual role of managing practical details and the Dowager's insistence that she participate in the more pleasant aspects of planning. The gown arrived 10 days before the ball, delivered in tissue-wrapped splendour that made Clarissa catch her breath. It was fashioned of silk in a shade of blue that captured something between sky and water, with a modest bodice adorned with delicate embroidery, and a skirt that fell in elegant lines. The dressmaker had judged her measurements perfectly, and when Clarissa tried it on in the privacy of her chamber, she barely recognized the woman reflected in the mirror. "You look beautiful," the Dowager pronounced when Clarissa modelled the gown for her inspection. "Not fashionable beauty, my dear, but something better. You look like yourself, only more so." Christopher, encountering Clarissa in the corridor after one such fitting, stopped short. "Good God, Miss Whitmore, you'll break hearts in that gown." "Don't be absurd," Clarissa replied, but she smiled despite herself. "I'm perfectly serious. In fact, I hereby claim your first waltz before the other gentlemen descend like wolves. Mr. Gravesend, I haven't danced in years. I'll likely tread on your feet. Then we shall limp together in perfect harmony." Word was sent to London informing Alexander of the ball. His response arrived by return post, a brief note indicating he would attend and bring several guests from town. The Dowager read his message aloud at dinner, her tone neutral, but her eyes knowing as they moved between Christopher and Clarissa. The night of the ball arrived with the soft warmth of late spring. Ashwell Park blazed with light. Every chandelier lit, every candle burning. The house transformed into something magical. Guests began arriving at 9, carriages crunching up the drive in steady procession. Ladies in silk and gentlemen in evening dress filling the entrance hall with colour and animated conversation. Clarissa remained in her chamber longer than necessary, nerves making her fingers clumsy as she fastened her mother's pearl necklace, the only jewellery she possessed of any value. Her hair had been dressed by one of the housemaids in a style more elaborate than her usual simple arrangement. Golden strands swept up to reveal the curve of her neck, with a few artful curls framing her face. She barely recognized herself. The sounds of music and laughter drifted up from below, and Clarissa knew she could delay no longer. Taking a deep breath, she left her chamber and made her way toward the grand staircase that descended into the main entrance hall. Christopher stood at the base of the stairs, resplendent in black evening dress, waiting as though he had known precisely when she would appear. When he looked up and saw her beginning her descent, his face transformed with undisguised admiration. Clarissa focused on each step, acutely conscious of eyes turning toward her. The entrance hall had filled with guests awaiting their turn to greet the dowager in the receiving line. Conversation faltered as people noticed the young woman descending the staircase, clearly trying to place her in the social hierarchy. When Clarissa reached the bottom step, Christopher offered his arm with theatrical gallantry. "Miss Whitmore, you honour us with your presence." "Christopher, really," she murmured. But she took his arm, grateful for the support. "Let them look," he said quietly as he led her toward the ballroom. "Let them see what I have seen for weeks now. You belong here, Clarissa. Not serving in the shadows, but standing in the light." The ballroom at Ashwell Park occupied the entire west wing of the house. Tonight it shone with devastating beauty. Hundreds of candles in crystal chandeliers casting golden light across polished floors. Hothouse flowers arranged in massive urns filled the air with fragrance. Musicians occupied a raised platform at one end, their instruments creating a lilting melody that made conversation a pleasant challenge rather than an impossibility. Alexander stood near the entrance to the ballroom, greeting guests alongside his mother. He wore black evening dress that emphasized his height and the breadth of his shoulders. His dark hair swept back from his forehead, his bearing suggesting both power and perfect control. He was conversing with Lord and Lady Hartwell when Clarissa and Christopher entered. His gaze swept past them initially, the cursory glance one gives to arriving guests. Then his eyes returned, and Clarissa watched something shift in his expression. Surprise, certainly, but also something else. Something that made her pulse quicken uncomfortably. Alexander stared at her for a long moment, his conversation with the Hartwells apparently forgotten. His blue eyes moved from her face to the gown, to the way her hand rested on Christopher's arm, then back to her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. Christopher felt her tension and covered her hand with his own. "Steady," he murmured. "You're doing beautifully." The dowager, noticing the disruption in the receiving line, turned to see what had captured her elder son's attention. Her eyes lit with satisfaction when she saw Clarissa. "My dear, you look absolutely lovely. Come, let me present you properly to our guests." The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and polite conversation. Clarissa met neighbouring families she had never encountered during her 3 years at Ashwell Park. Introduced now, not as the dowager's companion, but as a guest of the family. Some regarded her with curiosity, others with the calculation that attended any unmarried woman of uncertain position. But Christopher remained at her side, his easy charm smoothing over awkward moments, and his evident regard lending her consequence she would not otherwise possess. When the dancing began, Christopher claimed her hand for the opening set. Clarissa's fears about forgotten steps proved unfounded. Her body remembered the patterns her mind had thought lost. And Christopher was an excellent partner, guiding her through the figures with subtle pressure and encouraging smiles. "You see," he said, as they came together in the dance, "you belong here. You always have." From across the room, Alexander watched his brother waltz with Clarissa Whitmore and felt something dark and uncomfortable coiling in his chest. She moved with a grace he had never noticed, her posture perfect, her steps light, The blue gown transformed her from invisible companion to a woman who drew the eye, and Alexander could not look away. He danced with Miss Caroline Winters, daughter of a baron, and considered one of the season's beauties. She was lovely, accomplished, perfectly suitable. Alexander could not remember a word she said. His attention remained fixed on the woman in blue, on the way lamplight caught golden tones in her hair, on the smile she directed at his brother. The first waltz ended, and propriety should have dictated Christopher return Clarissa to the dowager's side. Instead, after the briefest interval, he claimed her again for the second dance. Eyebrows rose among the watching guests. To dance twice with the same lady suggested particular interest, especially when that lady was unknown and of uncertain consequence. Alexander excused himself from Miss Winters perhaps too abruptly, and made his way toward where his mother held court among the older guests. "Who is dancing with Christopher?" Lady Pemberton asked the dowager, her tone carrying calculated interest. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "Miss Clarissa Whitmore," the dowager replied calmly. "Daughter of the late Viscount Whitmore. She has been residing with me these past years." "Ah." Lady Pemberton's expression shifted to knowing sympathy. The Whitmore debts. Such a tragedy. The girl has some breeding at least, though dancing twice with your son will cause talk. "My son may dance with whomever he pleases," the dowager said with quiet steel. Alexander joined them in time to hear this exchange. "Mother, perhaps you should suggest Christopher moderate his attentions. People are beginning to speculate." "Let them speculate," the dowager replied serenely. "Christopher has been abroad for 5 years. If he wishes to dance with a pleasant young woman, I see no harm in it." "3 dances would be highly improper," Alexander said, his tone more severe than he intended. "Then I suppose we shall discover whether your brother cares about propriety or follows his own inclinations." The dowager's eyes held challenge. "I know which possibility I would wager on." As predicted, Christopher claimed Clarissa for the third waltz. The room fell into interested silence as they took the floor, every eye upon them, speculation running through the crowd like wildfire. Alexander felt his jaw tighten until it ached. The waltz brought couples into closer contact than other dances permitted, and Alexander watched Christopher's hand settle at Clarissa's waist, watched them move together with the ease of mutual regard. They spoke quietly as they danced, Clarissa's face tilted up toward Christopher's, her expression unguarded in a way Alexander had never seen. "Your brother seems quite taken with the Whitmore girl," Lord Pemberton observed, appearing at Alexander's elbow with a brandy. 3 dances is tantamount to a declaration. Is there an understanding between them?" "Not to my knowledge," Alexander replied, the words emerging more curtly than diplomacy warranted. "Interesting. Pretty enough girl, I suppose, though she brings nothing to the match. Still, your brother always did march to his own drum." Before Alexander could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew attention. Lord Hastings had arrived late, a widower of perhaps 40, whose estate bordered Ashwell Park. He was a handsome man with greying temples and an air of quiet prosperity. His gaze swept the ballroom and fixed on Clarissa with unmistakable interest. When the waltz ended, Hastings made his way directly to where Christopher stood with Clarissa, bowing with courteous formality. Alexander could not hear the exchange, but he saw Christopher stiffen slightly, saw Clarissa curtsy in acknowledgement, saw Hastings extend his hand clearly requesting the next dance. Something primitive and entirely irrational surged through Alexander. Before he fully registered his own intentions, he crossed the ballroom with long strides, reaching the group just as Christopher appeared about to make introductions. "Miss Whitmore," Alexander said, his voice emerging with authority he had not consciously summoned. "I believe you promised this dance to me earlier. My apologies for the delay in claiming it." Clarissa's green eyes widened with confusion and something that might have been panic. "Your Grace, I don't believe... Surely you remember." Alexander continued smoothly, extending his hand in a gesture that brooked no refusal. "You mentioned wishing to discuss my mother's comfort, and I suggested we might converse during a dance. It was a complete fabrication, and everyone present knew it." Christopher's expression darkened. Hastings stepped back with the careful courtesy of a man recognizing ducal prerogative, and Clarissa, caught in a social trap with no graceful escape, placed her hand in Alexander's with visible reluctance. Alexander led her onto the floor as the musicians struck up another waltz, acutely aware that they had become the center of attention. He settled his hand at her waist, feeling the warmth of her through the silk gown, and began guiding her through the steps. For several measures, they danced in tense silence. Clarissa held herself rigidly, her eyes fixed somewhere past his shoulder, her entire posture suggesting she wished to be anywhere else. "You might look at me," Alexander said finally. "People will think we're quarreling." "Are we not?" Clarissa replied, her voice low but carrying an edge he had never heard before. "You just lied shamelessly to prevent Lord Hastings from dancing with me." "I prevented nothing, merely postponed." "Why?" The question hung between them, direct and unanswerable. Why had he intervened? Alexander could not explain it to himself, much less to her. "My brother is making you conspicuous," he said instead. "3 dances constitutes particular attention. People will talk. Let them talk. I am 24, not some debutante whose reputation shatters at the slightest speculation. You are a guest in my mother's home. Your reputation reflects on this family." Clarissa's eyes finally met his, and Alexander was startled by the anger he saw there. "I have been a guest in your mother's home for 3 years, Your Grace. You never concerned yourself with my reputation before. Forgive me if I find your sudden interest suspicious. What do you imagine my motives are, Miss Whitmore? I imagine you dislike seeing your brother pay attention to someone you have always considered beneath notice. And I imagine you have decided to reassert your authority by reminding everyone present of their proper place." The words struck with uncomfortable accuracy. Alexander missed a step, something he never did, and had to adjust quickly to maintain the rhythm. "You misjudge me," he said, though even to his own ears the protest sounded weak. "Do I? You have passed me in corridors for 3 years without truly seeing me. Tonight, because I am wearing a decent gown and your brother finds me worth dancing with, suddenly you deign to acknowledge my existence. Forgive me if I do not find this flattering." The waltz ended before Alexander could formulate a response. Clarissa curtsied with rigid correctness and turned away, leaving him standing alone on the dance floor. The remainder of the evening passed in uncomfortable awareness for Alexander. He danced with appropriate partners, made polite conversation, fulfilled his duties as co-host. But his attention remained fixed on Clarissa Whitmore, watching her dance with other gentlemen, watching her laugh at Christopher's jests, watching her exist in the light rather than the shadows, and watching, Alexander finally confronted a truth he had been avoiding. He wanted her attention, wanted her green eyes to light with pleasure when she looked at him the way they lit for Christopher, wanted to be the man who made her smile, who understood her quiet strength, who saw her clearly. But he had spent 3 years proving he did not see her at all, and now his brother had claimed the place Alexander had been too blind to recognize he wanted. In the days following the ball, Alexander found himself inventing reasons to remain at Ashwell Park rather than returning to London. Estate business that could easily wait, discussions with his mother that need not be conducted in person, consultations about property improvements that his steward could handle without ducal oversight. He told himself he was being responsible, attentive to family obligations, but the truth manifested in the way his gaze sought Clarissa in every room, the way he appeared in the library during hours she typically spent there, the way he found himself walking past windows that overlooked the gardens where she and Christopher took their daily constitutionals. He watched them together with increasing frustration, noting the easy companionship between them, the way Clarissa's entire demeanor softened in Christopher's presence, and he felt the unfamiliar burn of jealousy combined with something worse, the recognition of his own failure. Christopher noticed his brother's altered behavior and drew his own conclusions. The tension between them grew, manifesting in short exchanges and weighted silences. The Dowager observed it all with the satisfaction of a strategist watching pieces move across a board according to plan. On Alexander's 5th evening at Ashwell Park, he encountered Clarissa alone in the conservatory. She was examining an orchid, her attention absorbed by the exotic bloom. Lamplight filtered through glass walls, creating an atmosphere of intimate seclusion. Miss Whitmore. She turned, and he watched wariness enter her expression. Your Grace, I wish to apologize for my behavior at the ball. My intervention with Lord Hastings was inappropriate. Clarissa studied him with those clear green eyes, and Alexander had the uncomfortable sensation of being thoroughly assessed. Why did you do it? I don't know, he admitted, the honesty surprising himself. Or rather, I did not know then. I am beginning to understand now. And what do you understand? That I have been a fool, Alexander thought. That I ignored you for 3 years and now cannot stop thinking about you. That watching you with my brother is slowly driving me mad. But he could not say these things, could not articulate feelings he barely understood himself. So he said nothing, and the silence stretched between them, heavy with words unspoken. If that is all, Your Grace, I should return to her Grace. She will be expecting me. Clarissa moved past him toward the door, and Alexander caught her wrist without thinking. She froze, looking down at where his fingers encircled her arm, then up at his face. I see you now, he said quietly. I should have seen you before, but I see you now. Perhaps, Clarissa replied, her voice steady despite the pulse he could feel racing beneath his fingers. You should have looked 3 years ago, when it might have mattered. She pulled free gently but firmly, and left him standing alone among the orchids, confronted with the consequences of his own blindness and uncertain how to proceed. The morning after his encounter with Clarissa in the conservatory, Alexander did something he had never done before. He sought her out deliberately, inventing a pretext so transparent it would have embarrassed him had he been thinking clearly. Miss Whitmore, he said, finding her in the morning room, reviewing household accounts. I wish to discuss the management of the eastern pastures. My steward suggests improvements, but I value a perspective from someone familiar with daily operations here. Clarissa looked up from her ledger, surprise evident in her green eyes. Your Grace, I know nothing of agricultural management. Surely your steward or Mr. Pemberley would better serve. Nevertheless, I would appreciate your opinion. It was awkward, forced, and Clarissa clearly recognized it as such. But courtesy demanded she accompany him on a tour of the grounds, listening as he discussed drainage systems and crop rotation, with a desperation that would have been comic had the situation been less pathetic. Over the following days, Alexander found himself manufacturing similar excuses. He solicited Clarissa's thoughts on redesigning the rose garden, though she possessed no expertise in landscape design. He appeared in the library during her customary reading hours, ostensibly to select a volume, but inevitably engaging her in stilted conversation. He questioned her about his mother's comfort with an attention to detail that exceeded anything demonstrated in 3 years. Clarissa responded with cautious courtesy, clearly uncertain what to make of this sudden transformation. She answered his questions, offered opinions when pressed, but maintained careful distance, as though suspecting some trap she could not yet identify. Christopher watched these interactions with growing displeasure. On the 4th day of Alexander's contrived attentions, he found his brother in the study and closed the door with decisive firmness. What game are you playing, Alexander? The Duke looked up from correspondence he had been pretending to read. I don't know what you mean. Don't insult my intelligence. You've been circling Miss Whitmore like a hawk for days. Suddenly you find her company indispensable after 3 years of treating her like furniture. What changed? Perhaps I have simply become aware of her considerable competence in managing Mother's household. Nonsense. Christopher moved closer, his usual easy manner replaced by something harder. You saw me paying attention to her, and now you cannot bear that someone else values what you overlooked. That is a rather dramatic interpretation. Is it? Then tell me honestly, brother, what are your intentions toward Miss Whitmore? The question hung in the air between them. Alexander set down his pen with careful precision. I have no intentions beyond ensuring Mother's companion is treated with appropriate respect. Appropriate respect? Christopher's laugh held no humour. You've shown her nothing but indifference for years. Now you follow her around Ashwell Park like a lovesick puppy, and you claim it's about respect. Watch your tone, Christopher. Or what? You'll remind me of your superior rank? Pull ducal authority when logic fails you. Christopher's brown eyes blazed with emotion Alexander had rarely seen in his younger brother. I'll tell you my intentions since you won't admit yours. I intend to court Miss Whitmore formally. I believe we would suit admirably, and I think she feels the same. The words hit Alexander like physical blows. You cannot be serious. Why not? Because she lacks fortune. Because her father's debts reduced her circumstances. Those things matter nothing to me. They will matter to society, Alexander said, grasping for solid ground. You're the son of a duke, Christopher. Such a match would be considered inappropriate. By whom? You. The same man who couldn't be bothered to acknowledge her existence until I showed him what he was missing. This is not about competition between us. Isn't it? Christopher moved to the window, his shoulders rigid. For once in your life, Alexander, something exists that your title and authority cannot simply claim. Miss Whitmore is not a property to be managed or a problem to be solved through superior rank. She is a woman who deserves genuine regard, not your sudden interest born from jealousy. I am not jealous, Alexander said, though the lie tasted bitter even as he spoke it. Then prove it. Return to London. Leave Miss Whitmore to make her own choices without your interference. I have every right to remain at my own estate. Of course you do. But ask yourself honestly why you wish to remain. Is it duty? Or is it because you cannot bear watching her smile at me the way she will never smile at you? The barb struck true, and Alexander felt anger surge hot and defensive. You overstep, Christopher. Someone needs to. You've spent your entire life so focused on duty and propriety that you've forgotten how to feel anything genuine. And now, when something finally touches you, you don't know what to do except try to control it. Before Alexander could respond, a knock interrupted them. The Dowager entered without waiting for permission, her expression suggesting she had heard raised voices through the door. Arguing over a woman, she said with deceptive mildness. How refreshingly human of you both. Mother, this doesn't concern you, Alexander said. When my sons fight over my companion in my own house, it very much concerns me. The Dowager settled into a chair with regal composure. Christopher, you care for Clarissa genuinely. I see that clearly. But Alexander, you have only just begun to see her at all. Neither position gives you claim on her choices. I would never presume to claim her. Christopher said quietly. I only wish the freedom to court her without Alexander's interference. And you, Alexander? What do you wish? The question forced Alexander to confront truths he had been avoiding. What did he wish? He hardly knew himself. The feelings Clarissa inspired were too new, too undefined to articulate. Jealousy, certainly. Regret for his years of blindness. But beyond that, he could not say. I wish to ensure Miss Whitmore is not taken advantage of, he said finally. She is in a vulnerable position. Raised hopes that cannot be fulfilled would be cruel. You mean my hopes cannot be fulfilled because of her circumstances? Christopher said bitterly. While yours as a duke could presumably override such concerns. I made no such suggestion. You didn't need to. Your entire life has been built on the assumption that your rank places you above ordinary constraints. The Dowager raised a hand, stopping the argument before it could escalate further. Enough. Both of you are so focused on what you want that you've forgotten to consider what Clarissa might want. Has either of you thought to ask her? The question silenced them both. I thought not, the Dowager continued. While you two engage in this territorial dispute, Clarissa manages my household, tends to my comfort, and pretends not to notice she has become the object of unwanted attention from men who never saw her worth until circumstances forced them to look. Alexander felt the rebuke like a slap. Mother, that is unjust. Is it? Christopher, you have been kind and attentive from the moment you arrived. I do not question your sincerity. But Alexander, you have spent 3 years treating Clarissa with such indifference. She has become expert at invisibility. And now you suddenly wish to be noticed. That seems rather selfish to me. I acknowledge my prior failures, Alexander said stiffly. I am attempting to rectify them. By hovering around her with invented questions about pastures and gardens. By making her uncomfortable in her own home. That is not rectification, Alexander. That is disruption born from your ego. The Dowager rose, her expression softening slightly. "I love you both, but Clarissa deserves better than being caught between your competing claims. If you truly care for her well-being, you will give her space to determine her own wishes without pressure from either of you." She left, closing the door quietly behind her. The brothers remained in tense silence. "She's right," Christopher said finally. "We've been acting like children fighting over a toy. Miss Whitmore is hardly a toy. No, she's a person who has endured enough difficulty without us adding to it." Christopher moved toward the door, then paused. "I meant what I said, Alexander. I intend to court her properly, but I will not press her if she does not welcome my attentions. Can you say the same?" He left before Alexander could answer, which was perhaps fortunate, as Alexander had no answer prepared. 3 days later, Clarissa sat in her small chamber, staring at a letter that had arrived in the morning post. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the contents were clear enough. Mrs. Blackwell's registry was pleased to inform her that the Kensington family of London had expressed strong interest in engaging her services as governess to their 3 children. The position offered respectable compensation, comfortable lodgings, and an immediate start should she wish it. Clarissa read the letter 3 times, her mind working through implications and consequences. She had sent inquiries to the agency months ago, during a moment of particular desperation. She had never expected an actual offer, and certainly not one arriving at such a complicated moment. But as she sat in the quiet of her room, listening to voices drift up from the garden where Alexander and Christopher took their morning walk in strained silence, Clarissa recognized an uncomfortable truth. She had become the focal point of conflict between brothers, a position she had never sought and could not maintain. The Dowager's household, once her refuge, had transformed into something tense and uncomfortable. More than that, she recognized the danger in Alexander's sudden attention. For 3 years, she had built her peace around invisibility and acceptance. Now that foundation was crumbling, and Clarissa found herself feeling things she had no business feeling for a duke who had noticed her only when his brother demonstrated her worth. The decision, once recognized, came with surprising clarity. She could not remain at Ashwell Park while serving as ammunition in a contest she had no wish to participate in. She needed to leave before her own confused feelings complicated matters further. That afternoon, she requested an audience with the Dowager. "Your Grace, I must speak with you about a matter of some importance." The Dowager set aside her embroidery, her expression knowing. "You wish to leave." Clarissa should not have been surprised that the older woman had anticipated her. "I have received an offer of a position in London, governess to 3 children in a respectable household. The terms are generous, and you feel you must accept. I believe it would be best for everyone, Your Grace. My presence here has become complicated enough to invite misunderstanding. I do not wish to be the cause of conflict between your sons." The Dowager studied her for a long moment. "You could also choose to stay and allow both my sons the opportunity to court you properly. See which, if either, you truly prefer." "I cannot," Clarissa said quietly. "Your Grace, you have been unfailingly kind to me. You took me in when I had nothing and nowhere to go. You have treated me with respect and genuine affection. I am more grateful than I can express. But I am also 24 with no illusions about my circumstances. Mr. Christopher has been wonderfully attentive, but I cannot determine if his regard stems from genuine feeling or from the novelty of finding intelligence in an unexpected place. And the Duke," Clarissa paused, searching for words. "The Duke sees me now only because his brother forced him to look. That is not the foundation for anything real." "You're protecting yourself," the Dowager said gently. "I understand that impulse, my dear. But sometimes protection and cowardice look remarkably similar. Perhaps, but cowardice that preserves dignity seems preferable to boldness that ends in humiliation." The Dowager sighed. "I will not try to dissuade you if your mind is made. You have agency over your own life, Clarissa, and I would never seek to deny you that. But know that you will be deeply missed, and not only by me. Thank you, Your Grace, for everything." That evening at dinner, Clarissa made her announcement. Christopher's face fell visibly. Alexander's expression remained controlled. But something shifted in his blue eyes. "When do you depart?" Christopher asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Within the week, if travel arrangements can be made." The Kensingtons hope I can begin as soon as possible. This seems rather sudden, Alexander observed. Has something occurred to make Ashwell Park inhospitable to you? Clarissa met his gaze directly. On the contrary, Your Grace, I have been extraordinarily fortunate in my time here. But circumstances change, and this opportunity provides advancement I would be foolish to refuse. Advancement, Alexander repeated, and something in his tone suggested he understood the subtext perfectly. Of course, one cannot argue with practical considerations. The remainder of the meal passed in strained silence. Afterward, Christopher sought Clarissa in the library, where she had gone to seek solace among the books that had been her constant companions. "Is it my fault?" he asked without preamble. "Have my attentions made you uncomfortable?" "No, Christopher. Your friendship has been a gift. But I think we both recognize that friendship is what we share, not deeper feeling. I had hoped—" He paused, then smiled ruefully. "You're right, of course. I admire you tremendously, Clarissa. But admiration and love are different things, and you deserve the latter." "As do you," she replied gently. The following days passed in a flurry of preparation. Clarissa packed her modest belongings, arranged travel to London, and attempted to ignore the weight of Alexander's gaze whenever he encountered her in corridors or common rooms. He did not speak to her beyond brief courtesies, but his presence felt heavy with unspoken words. On her final evening at Ashwell Park, Clarissa sat alone in the garden as twilight descended. She heard footsteps on the gravel path and turned to find Alexander approaching. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the bench beside her. She nodded, and he sat, maintaining careful distance between them. "I owe you an apology," he said, after a long silence. "Multiple apologies, in truth, for 3 years of blindness, for my recent interference in your life, for not seeing you when I should have. Your Grace, there is no need. There is every need. I have behaved abominably." Alexander's voice held an honesty she had not heard before. "I cannot even claim ignorance as justification. I simply did not look, and now that I finally see you clearly, I have driven you away." "You have not driven me away. I am choosing to leave." "Are those truly different things?" He turned to face her, and in the fading light, his features seemed softer, less controlled. "If I had seen you from the beginning, would you still choose to go?" It was an impossible question, one Clarissa could not answer honestly without revealing too much. "We cannot know what might have been, Your Grace. We can only act on what is. And what is? You are a duke. I am an impoverished companion accepting a position as governess. Those are facts that no amount of sudden regard can change." "They could change," Alexander said quietly. "If we wish them to." Clarissa stood, needing distance from the dangerous implications in his words. "I do not wish to be seen only when circumstances force observation, Your Grace. I deserve better than being your second choice or the prize in competition with your brother. You were never second choice. You were my failure to choose at all." The words, raw with something that sounded like genuine regret, struck her harder than she expected. But Clarissa had learned in 3 years that survival sometimes required firm boundaries, even when the heart whispered otherwise. "Then let that be your lesson learned, Your Grace. Perhaps the next invisible woman in your life will benefit from your improved perception." She left him sitting alone in the garden as darkness fell, and if she wept in the privacy of her chamber afterward, no one needed to know. The morning of Clarissa's planned departure arrived grey and drizzly, the weather matching the sombre mood that had settled over Ashwell Park. Her modest trunk stood packed in her chamber, everything she owned in the world reduced to one worn piece of luggage and a small valise. She was in the garden taking one final walk among the roses when Christopher found her. Rain misted softly, not heavy enough to drive her inside, but enough to dampen her shawl and cling to her hair in tiny droplets. "Clarissa, wait. Please." She turned to find him striding across the wet grass, his expression urgent. He wore no coat despite the damp, his shirt and waistcoat already spotted with rain. "Christopher, you'll catch your death. Come inside." "Not until you hear me." He reached her, breathing slightly hard from his hurried approach. "I cannot let you leave without speaking plainly." Clarissa felt her heart sink. She knew what was coming and dreaded it. Christopher, please don't. Marry me. The words fell between them, simple and devastating. Christopher took her hands, his grip warm despite the cold rain beginning to fall more steadily. I know this is sudden. I know your plans are made. But I cannot watch you walk away without asking. These weeks with you have been the happiest I can remember. You're intelligent, kind, strong in ways most people never recognize. I admire you tremendously. I believe we would suit each other admirably. Christopher. Clarissa's voice caught on his name. You honor me more than I can say. Your friendship has meant everything these past weeks. But, he searched her face, already reading her answer. But friendship is what we share. Not love, not the kind of feeling that should bind two people in marriage. She squeezed his hands gently before releasing them. You're a wonderful man. You deserve a wife who loves you desperately, not one who accepts you from gratitude or affection. You feel nothing deeper for me. I feel tremendous fondness, respect, genuine appreciation for your kindness when I needed it most. Clarissa chose her words carefully, wanting honesty without cruelty. But I don't feel the kind of love that makes the heart race and the world transform. You deserve that, Christopher. So do I, if I'm fortunate enough to find it. Is it Alexander? The question emerged quietly, without accusation. Is that why you cannot accept me? Clarissa turned away, unable to meet his perceptive gaze. Your brother has nothing to do with this. I think he has everything to do with it, though you won't admit it even to yourself. Christopher's voice held sad understanding. You're more honest than I am, Clarissa. I convinced myself my admiration was love because I wanted it to be. But you're right. What we have is friendship, precious in its own way, but not the foundation for marriage. I'm sorry, Clarissa whispered. Don't be. You're saving us both from a comfortable mistake. Footsteps on the gravel path made them both turn. Alexander stood several yards away, rain darkening his coat, his expression unreadable. How long he had been there, how much he had heard, Clarissa could not determine. Forgive the interruption, he said, his voice carefully neutral. I did not mean to intrude on a private conversation. You heard? Christopher asked directly. Enough. Alexander moved closer, his gaze fixed on Clarissa. Miss Whitmore has refused your proposal. With more grace than I deserved in asking. Christopher glanced between his brother and Clarissa, then stepped back. I'll leave you both. Clarissa, whatever you choose, I wish you nothing but happiness. He walked away through the increasing rain, leaving Clarissa alone with Alexander in the garden that had become witness to too many difficult conversations. You should go inside, Alexander said after a long silence. You're getting soaked. As are you. I don't care. He moved closer, and Clarissa saw something wild and desperate in his eyes that she had never seen before. 3 years. I had you under my roof for 3 years and never truly saw you. My own brother spent weeks in your company and recognized immediately what I was too blind to notice. Your grace, this serves no purpose. I was a fool. The words burst from him with raw intensity. A blind, arrogant fool who thought his duties and responsibilities were all that mattered. I looked at you and saw nothing because I wasn't truly looking. And now that I finally see you, now that I understand what I've lost, you're walking away. Rain fell harder, plastering his dark hair to his forehead. But Alexander seemed oblivious. Clarissa felt her chest tighten with emotions she had worked desperately to suppress. Why do you care now? She asked, the question that had haunted her for days finally emerging. Why does it matter to you that I'm leaving? Because I cannot stop thinking about you. Alexander's control cracked completely. Because every room in this house feels empty when you're not in it. Because watching you smile at my brother made me realize I've never made you smile at all. Because I spent 3 years being blind, and I finally opened my eyes only to discover it's too late. Too late for what? For anything. Everything. He reached for her, then dropped his hand as though afraid she might break. For the chance to court you properly. To earn your regard instead of demanding it through rank. To prove I see you now. Truly see you. In ways I should have seen you from the beginning. Clarissa's heart hammered against her ribs. This was Alexander Gravesend, Duke of Northmere, standing in the rain, confessing feelings that seemed impossible, coming from a man who had treated her as invisible for years. Part of her wanted desperately to believe him, but a harder, wiser part remembered every time he had looked through her, every conversation conducted as though she did not exist. "You see me now because your brother forced you to look," she said, keeping her voice steady through sheer will. "That is not the same as choosing to see me on your own. You're right. But does the catalyst matter if the result is genuine?" Yes, it matters tremendously. Clarissa wrapped her arms around herself against the cold rain and colder truth. I will not be valued only when someone else demonstrates my worth first. I will not be the woman you settle for after failing to claim me as a prize. I deserve better than being your sudden revelation, your convenient enlightenment. You deserve everything, Alexander said hoarsely. You deserve a man who saw you from the first moment and never looked away. I know I'm not that man. I failed you utterly, but I'm asking, begging, for the chance to prove I can be better, and I'm saying no. The words cost her more than he would ever know. I've spent 3 years being invisible, Alexander. I won't spend the rest of my life wondering if you truly see me or if you simply convinced yourself you should. Clarissa, Miss Whitmore, she corrected gently. That formality suited you well for 3 years. Best we return to it now. She walked away before her resolve could crumble, before the desperate longing in his eyes could weaken the defenses she had built so carefully. Behind her, she heard him call her name once more, but she did not turn back. The next morning, she departed Ashwell Park in the hired carriage that would take her to London. The Dowager embraced her with tears in her eyes. Christopher kissed her hand with affectionate benediction. Alexander was nowhere to be seen, which Clarissa told herself was a relief, even as some part of her ached at his absence. As the carriage rolled down the long drive, Clarissa permitted herself one look back at the house that had been her home for 3 years. A figure stood at an upper window, tall, dark-haired, unmistakable even at a distance. Alexander watching her leave. She turned away and did not look back again. The 4 months that followed Clarissa's departure transformed Ashwell Park in ways both subtle and profound. The house seemed quieter, emptier, as though her absence had removed some essential vitality. The Dowager noticed it first, remarking that the household ran less smoothly, despite hiring a new companion. A pleasant but unremarkable woman who managed tasks competently, but without Clarissa's particular genius for anticipating needs. Christopher processed his rejected proposal through long walks and longer conversations with his mother. Initially wounded, he gradually recognized the truth Clarissa had spoken. His regard for her was genuine, but not romantic love, more admiration and compatible friendship than the deeper passion marriage required. I convinced myself I loved her because I wanted to be the hero of her story, he admitted to the Dowager one evening. I wanted to rescue her from invisibility and prove myself different from Alexander. But that's rather self-centered when examined honestly. Self-awareness is painful but valuable, the Dowager replied. You're young yet, Christopher. Real love will find you when you're ready to recognize it. And Alexander? What of his feelings? The Dowager sighed. Your brother is suffering rather magnificently. I've never seen him so thoroughly miserable. Indeed, Alexander's transformation was remarkable. He returned to London, but could not settle. Business that once absorbed him now seemed pointless. Social obligations he had previously fulfilled with dutiful precision now felt unbearable. He attended meetings, managed his estates, performed his role as duke with mechanical efficiency, while some essential part of him remained absent. At Ashwell Park during his now weekly visits, rather than monthly, the changes were more visible. He wandered the library where Clarissa had spent so many hours, finding himself drawn to volumes she had favoured. He noticed gaps in household management that her competence had filled seamlessly. He discovered small improvements she had implemented, a reorganised linen closet, a more efficient accounting system, thoughtful arrangements of flowers in rooms no one used, all the invisible work she had done while he ignored her existence. You're haunting your own house, Christopher observed during one visit, finding Alexander standing motionless in the morning room, staring at nothing. She sat here, Alexander said quietly. Every morning, working on accounts or correspondence. I walked past this room hundreds of times and never once stopped to acknowledge her. Torturing yourself won't bring her back. I'm not torturing myself. I'm finally paying attention. 3 years too late, but still. The Dowager watched her sons with complex emotions. She had orchestrated Christopher's return, hoping to wake Alexander from his emotional torpor, wanting him to feel something beyond duty and obligation. Her strategy had succeeded perhaps too well. Alexander now felt entirely too much, and the object of those feelings was beyond his reach. You could go to London, she suggested one evening when Alexander sat brooding in the drawing room. See how she fares in her new position. And accomplish what, mother? I've already declared myself and been refused. Pursuing her further would be harassment, not courtship. So you simply accept defeat? I accept the consequences of my own failures. Alexander's voice was bleak. Clarissa deserves better than a man who noticed her only when forced. She made that abundantly clear. Winter settled over Ashwell Park, and with it came a cold that seemed to penetrate beyond mere weather. The house felt frozen, suspended, waiting for something to shift or break. Alexander visited more frequently, as though proximity to spaces Clarissa had occupied provided some comfort. He asked the Dowager about her occasionally. Had she written? Was she well? Did the Kensingtons treat her kindly? But the questions emerged carefully, as though he feared seeming too interested. Christopher, having processed his own feelings, attempted to help his brother with less success. You could write to her, he suggested. Apologize properly. Explain what you couldn't articulate in the garden. I've written 17 letters, Alexander admitted. Burned them all. What words could possibly suffice? Forgive me for being blind. I see you now that you're gone. She deserves more than my inadequate attempts at redemption. Perhaps she deserves the chance to decide that for herself. Or perhaps I should respect her clearly stated wishes and leave her in peace. The arguments went in circles, always returning to the same inescapable truth. Alexander had failed to see Clarissa when she was present, and no amount of belated recognition could undo 3 years of invisibility. On a particularly cold December evening, the Dowager found Alexander in the conservatory, where he had last spoken meaningfully with Clarissa months earlier. He stood among the orchids, lost in memory. She told me I saw her only because you and Christopher forced me to look, he said without turning. And she was right. I cannot claim I would have noticed her on my own. That awareness makes everything worse. Perhaps, the Dowager said gently. But people change, Alexander. Growth, even belated growth, has value. Not if it comes too late. Is it too late? Or have you simply decided it must be because the alternative requires more courage than you possess? Alexander turned to face his mother, surprised by the sharp edge in her tone. You think me a coward? I think you're using Clarissa's reasonable anger as an excuse to protect yourself from further rejection. You failed her once, through blindness. Are you failing her again through fear? The words struck deep. Alexander had no answer, only the uncomfortable recognition that his mother might be right. But what courage demanded versus what honor permitted remained unclear, and in that uncertainty, the frozen winter deepened while Clarissa remained in London, absent but impossible to forget. In London, Clarissa Whitmore discovered that survival required a different kind of invisibility than she had practiced at Ashwell Park. The Kensington household occupied a handsome townhouse in Mayfair, 4 stories of elegant architecture filled with the controlled chaos that attended any family with 3 energetic children. Lady Kensington was a woman of exacting standards and precise expectations, but she proved fair in her treatment and generous with wages. The children, 2 girls of 9 and 11 and a boy of 7, initially tested Clarissa's patience and authority before accepting her as their new governess. 3 months into her position, Clarissa had established routines and boundaries. Mornings were devoted to formal lessons in the schoolroom, afternoons to educational walks through museums and parks when weather permitted, evenings to reading and music practice. It was demanding work that left her exhausted but satisfied, too busy to dwell on memories she had tried to leave in Kent, except in the quiet moments before sleep, when the grand rooms of Ashwell Park haunted her thoughts. the library's leather and paper scent, the garden paths where she had walked with Christopher, the conservatory where Alexander had finally seen her clearly, far too late to matter. She told herself she did not miss him. The Duke had made his belated declarations only after losing her to his brother's competition. His sudden regard meant nothing beyond wounded pride and the human tendency to want what one could not have. Yet her heart insisted on remembering the desperation in his voice during their final conversation, the rain plastering dark hair to his forehead, the way his careful control had shattered completely. "Miss Whitmore, you seem distracted," Lady Kensington observed one afternoon, when Clarissa had allowed young Thomas to wander from his arithmetic lesson. "Is something troubling you?" "Forgive me, my lady. I shall be more attentive." Lady Kensington studied her with shrewd eyes. "You're an excellent governess, Miss Whitmore, but you have the look of someone running from something. Or someone. I am running toward better prospects, my lady. Not away from anything." "If you say so. But I've lived long enough to recognize heartache when I see it." The observation unsettled Clarissa more than she cared to admit. She had not allowed herself to name what she felt as heartache, preferring to categorize it as reasonable disappointment or practical adjustment. But Lady Kensington's words lodged uncomfortably, suggesting truths Clarissa was not prepared to examine. In early January, Lady Kensington invited Clarissa to accompany the family to a musical evening at Lady Pembroke's residence. It was unusual for governesses to attend such events, but Lady Kensington believed in broadening her children's social experiences and required Clarissa's supervision. The Pembroke drawing room was crowded with fashionable guests when they arrived. Clarissa positioned herself discreetly near the children, prepared to fade into familiar invisibility, while others enjoyed the entertainment. But as she surveyed the room, her gaze caught on a familiar figure across the crowded space. Lord Hastings stood conversing with several gentlemen near the pianoforte. He appeared well, his greying temples distinguished in the lamplight, his bearing suggesting comfortable prosperity. As though sensing her attention, he looked up and their eyes met. Recognition followed by obvious pleasure crossed his features, and he excused himself from his companions to approach. "Miss Whitmore," he said, bowing with courteous formality. "What an unexpected delight! I had heard you'd left Kent for a position in London, but did not dare hope I might encounter you. Lord Hastings, how pleasant to see a familiar face. The pleasure is entirely mine, I assure you." His warm brown eyes held genuine regard. "You are companion to Lady Kensington, governess to her children, my lord. Ah, they are fortunate to have you." He glanced toward where the Kensington children sat remarkably still under their mother's watchful eye. "Might I call upon you? That is, if such visits would not be inappropriate given your position." Clarissa hesitated only briefly. Lord Hastings represented safety, respectability, a future uncomplicated by wounded dukes and impossible feelings. "I believe Lady Kensington would permit supervised social calls in the drawing room during appropriate hours." "Then I shall presume upon that permission. Would Thursday afternoon suit?" "It would suit admirably, my lord." True to his word, Lord Hastings called on Thursday, bringing a small gift of hothouse flowers and engaging Clarissa in conversation that was both intelligent and comfortable. He returned the following week, and the week after, establishing a pattern of courteous attention that Lady Kensington observed with approval. "Lord Hastings is a respectable man," she remarked to Clarissa after the fourth visit, "a widower of good character and solid fortune. He seems quite taken with you, Miss Whitmore." "He is very kind," Clarissa replied carefully. "Kind, yes, but also interested in more than friendship, unless I miss my guess. Would such attention be welcome?" Clarissa considered the question with the brutal honesty she had learned over 3 months of rebuilding her life. "I am 24, my lady, with no fortune and uncertain prospects beyond this position. Lord Hastings offers security, companionship, and an established household. It would be foolish not to welcome such attention. That is a remarkably practical answer that says nothing about your feelings. Perhaps practical answers are all I can afford." Lady Kensington's expression softened. "Oh, my dear, what happened at your previous position? You speak like a woman who has learned to expect nothing beyond survival." "I learned to be realistic about my circumstances, my lady. That seems preferable to harbouring impossible hopes." The conversation ended there, But it lingered in Clarissa's thoughts. Was she being practical or simply protecting herself from further disappointment? Lord Hastings was everything sensible, stable, offering exactly the kind of future a woman in her position should eagerly embrace. Yet when she imagined accepting his courtship, for surely that was where his visits were leading, she felt resignation rather than anticipation. Not the heart-racing excitement she had felt in those final moments with Alexander in the rain. His control shattered and his feelings raw. But that had been illusion born from belated guilt and competitive pride, she reminded herself firmly. Lord Hastings offered reality, and reality deserved consideration. In late January, on an unusually mild afternoon, Clarissa took the Kensington children to Hyde Park for exercise and fresh air. She was supervising their game of catch when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Miss Whitmore, I hoped I might find you here." She turned to find Christopher Gravesend approaching across the winter grass, his expression warm, but cautious. He looked well, his colour healthy, his bearing suggesting a man who had made peace with disappointment. "Mr. Gravesend, this is unexpected. I'm in London on business and took a chance you might bring your charges to the park." He glanced toward the children, who had paused their game to stare at the strange gentleman. "Might we walk a moment? I promise to remain within sight of your responsibilities." Clarissa instructed the children to continue their play under the supervision of the maid who had accompanied them, then fell into step beside Christopher along one of the park's gravelled paths. They walked in silence for several moments, the companionable quiet they had once shared settling between them. "I needed to see you were well," Christopher said eventually. "I behaved rather dramatically that morning in the garden. I wanted to apologize properly without the rain and heightened emotions. You have nothing to apologize for. Your proposal honored me. My proposal was sincere but misguided." Christopher's smile held rueful self-awareness. "I've had time to examine my feelings honestly. What I felt for you was genuine admiration and friendship, Clarissa. I confused those feelings with romantic love because I wanted to be different from Alexander. Wanted to prove I could see value where he had not. But that's rather self-centered when examined clearly. You were never anything but kind to me. Perhaps. But kindness motivated by proving something to my brother isn't entirely pure, is it?" He paused, studying her face. "How are you truly? Lady Kensington treats you well." "Very well. The work is demanding, but satisfying. The children are bright and responsive." Clarissa kept her tone light, offering the surface truths, while deeper feelings remained protected. "That's what you tell yourself to make this bearable," Christopher observed gently. "But what do you feel?" The question, so direct and perceptive, threatened the careful equilibrium Clarissa had constructed. "I feel fortunate to have good employment. I feel grateful for opportunities many women in my circumstances never receive. And lonely? Regretful? Those are permitted feelings too. Regret serves no purpose." "Perhaps not. But acknowledging feelings is healthier than burying them." Christopher stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "I saw Alexander before I left Kent. He's a disaster, Clarissa. Working himself into exhaustion, barely speaking beyond necessary pleasantries, haunting Ashwell Park like a ghost in his own home. Mother says she's never seen him so thoroughly miserable." Clarissa felt her chest tighten, but kept her expression neutral. "That is unfortunate. But the Duke's emotional state is not my responsibility. Isn't it? At least partially?" "No." The word emerged more forcefully than she intended. "I will not accept responsibility for Alexander Gravesend's belated feelings. He ignored me for 3 years, Christopher. 3 years of walking past me as though I were furniture. And now that I'm gone, suddenly I matter. That's guilt and wounded pride, not genuine regard. I think you're wrong." Christopher's voice was quiet but certain. "I think my brother finally woke up and discovered what he'd lost through his own blindness. And I think his suffering is genuine, not performance. Then he can learn from it and treat the next woman better. You still care for him. I can hear it in your voice even when you're denying it." Clarissa turned away, unable to meet Christopher's knowing eyes. "What I feel is irrelevant. I will not be the woman valued only when someone else demonstrates worth first. I deserve better than being Alexander's revelation." "You do deserve better. But perhaps he's learned to be better, Isn't that worth considering? And if he hasn't, if his sudden regard fades as quickly as it appeared once the novelty of wanting what he cannot have wears off? Clarissa's voice cracked slightly. I spent 3 years invisible, Christopher. I built my peace around that invisibility. I cannot risk that peace on Alexander's uncertain transformation. Christopher was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I understand. Truly I do. But Clarissa, refusing to risk means refusing to live. Sometimes the bravest choice is letting hope in again, even when experience has taught us to lock the door. And sometimes wisdom is recognizing when hope would be foolishness. They walked back toward the children in thoughtful silence. Before parting, Christopher took her hand briefly. Whatever you decide, I wish you happiness. You deserve that more than anything. But don't let fear disguised as practicality rob you of possibilities. After he left, Clarissa sat on a bench watching her charges play while his words circled her thoughts. Fear disguised as practicality. Was that what motivated her resistance? Or was she simply being realistic about a duke who had noticed her only when forced? That evening, as she prepared the children for bed, young Thomas asked an unexpected question. Miss Whitmore, were you in love with that gentleman in the park? Certainly not. Mr. Gravesend is an old friend. Nothing more. But you looked sad after he left. Mother says people look sad when they miss someone they love. Your mother is very wise, but sometimes people look sad for other reasons. What reasons make you sad, Miss Whitmore? Clarissa paused in brushing his hair, considering how to answer. Sometimes I'm sad because I miss a place that felt like home, and sometimes I'm sad because I'm not certain where home is anymore. Is that why Lord Hastings keeps visiting? To give you a new home? The child's perceptiveness startled her. Lord Hastings is a kind man who enjoys conversation. He wants to marry you. I heard Mother tell Father so. Will you say yes? I haven't been asked, Thomas. But if you were asked? Clarissa finished with his hair and turned him to face her. If I were asked, I would consider very carefully what would make me happy. That's what grown-ups must do, Thomas. We think about what will make us happy in the long term, not just in the moment. But as she lay in bed that night, Clarissa wondered if she was following her own advice. Lord Hastings would make her comfortable, secure, protected. But would he make her happy? Or was she preparing to accept safety as a substitute for joy because joy had proven too dangerous to pursue? And beneath that question lay one more troubling. When she imagined the future, why did her traitorous heart keep conjuring an image of dark hair and blue eyes and a desperate voice saying, I cannot stop thinking about you? She had no answers, only the growing awareness that London had proven a less effective refuge than she had hoped. The past remained stubbornly present, and the future grew more uncertain with each of Lord Hastings' visits and each memory of Ashwell Park that refused to fade. A few days later, Lord Hastings requested a private word. Clarissa received him in the drawing room at Lady Kensington's direction. The children's lessons concluded, and the household settled into that quiet hour between daylight and lamps. Hastings stood near the window, hat in hand, his usual ease tempered by an uncharacteristic seriousness. Miss Whitmore, he began, and then corrected himself with a faint, self-conscious smile. Clarissa, if you will allow it, I have come to speak plainly. I have not concealed my intentions these past weeks, and I would not insult you by pretending my visit is mere habit. She felt the moment tighten around them, as if even the air were listening. My lord, let me finish, he said gently. I have admired you from the first. Not as a passing fancy, but as a woman of sense and steadiness, with a kindness that does not weaken her and a strength that does not harden her. I would ask for your hand if you believed you could be content as my wife. The words were everything Thomas had suspected and everything Clarissa had tried not to invite. She drew a slow breath, steadying herself the way she did before correcting a child's difficult sum. You honor me, she said softly, and you deserve a yes from someone whose heart is free enough to give it without reservation. Hastings held very still. Is it not? Clarissa's gaze dropped to the rug, to the pattern of flowers that never faded, and then lifted again with careful honesty. No, not yet. I would not marry for security alone, nor for gratitude, however great. I have spent too many years learning the difference. A shadow crossed his face, quickly mastered. And if you were to wait? It would be cruel to ask you to wait on an uncertainty I cannot promise to resolve, she replied. You have been nothing but honourable to me. I cannot repay that with half-truths. For a moment he said nothing, and she feared she had wounded him beyond repair. Then he inclined his head, the gesture of a gentleman who understood pride and pain and refused to make either a spectacle. I am disappointed, he admitted, but I am grateful for the respect you have shown me. When you do choose, I hope it will be for happiness, and that you will not mistake obligation for it. I won't, she whispered. Hastings' mouth softened, almost a smile. Then I shall take my leave, and I shall not trouble you again. But if ever you require a friend, you have one, whether or not you accept his name. After he was gone, Clarissa remained where she stood for several minutes, hands loosely clasped, her thoughts unsteady. She had closed one door with the gentleness it deserved. She did not know which door would open next, or whether she was brave enough to walk through it. Part 7. The letter arrived on a grey February morning, delivered by special courier to the Kensington townhouse. Lady Kensington brought it to the schoolroom herself, her expression grave. Miss Whitmore, this came for you. The messenger said it was urgent. Clarissa's hands trembled slightly as she broke the ducal seal. Alexander's handwriting, usually so controlled, showed signs of haste in the uneven strokes. Miss Whitmore, my mother has taken seriously ill. The doctors fear complications from her old rheumatic fever affecting her heart. She asks for you constantly. I would not presume to command your presence, but I beg you to consider returning to Ashwell Park. Whatever lies between us, she needs you. Alexander, bad news, Lady Kensington asked gently. The Dowager Duchess is gravely ill. I must go to her immediately. Of course. Take whatever time you require. Your position here will remain secure. Within hours, Clarissa was in a hired carriage racing toward Kent. The winter roads slick with rain and rutted with mud, her heart heavy with fear. By dusk the carriage lamps were burning, and what ought to have been a brisk journey stretched into a weary crawl of ruts, stoppages, and biting wind. The Dowager had been fragile when Clarissa left 4 months ago, but this sudden decline suggested something catastrophic. The woman who had taken her in, treated her with genuine affection, given her refuge when she had nothing, might be dying. The hours felt interminable. Clarissa arrived at Ashwell Park near midnight to find the house blazing with lights, servants moving with the quiet efficiency that attended serious illness. Alexander met her in the entrance hall, and Clarissa was shocked by his appearance. He looked haggard, his face drawn, dark circles beneath his eyes suggesting he had not slept in days. Thank you for coming, he said simply. She's upstairs. Dr. Harrison is with her now. Clarissa barely paused to remove her cloak before hurrying up the familiar stairs to the Dowager's chambers. The doctor emerged just as she arrived, his expression carefully neutral. Miss Whitmore, Her Grace has been asking for you. The crisis passed this morning, but she remains very weak. Brief visits only, and nothing to agitate her. Clarissa entered the dimly lit chamber. The Dowager lay propped against pillows, her face pale but her grey eyes alert. When she saw Clarissa, tears spilled down her cheeks. My dear girl, you came. Of course I came. Clarissa moved to the bedside, taking the Dowager's thin hand. You cannot frighten me like this, Your Grace. I absolutely forbid it. A weak smile. Always so fierce beneath that quiet exterior. I've missed you terribly, Clarissa. And I you. But you must rest now. Save your strength. Soon. First, we must talk. Over the following days, as the Dowager's condition stabilized under Dr. Harrison's care and Clarissa's devoted nursing, they did talk. During the long night vigils when the house slept and only patient and companion remained awake, the Dowager revealed truths Clarissa had suspected but never confirmed. I orchestrated much of what happened, she admitted one night, her voice quiet but clear, inviting Christopher home when I did, insisting you attend the ball, planting seeds in Alexander's mind about his blindness. I wanted to wake him from the emotional stupor he'd lived in for years. You manipulated us, Clarissa said without accusation. I did, and I won't apologize for it, though I am sorry for the pain it caused you. The Dowager's grip tightened on Clarissa's hand. Alexander has spent his entire adult life devoted to duty at the expense of feeling anything real. I wanted him to feel something, anything, before it was too late. Before he became so calcified in his role that he forgot he was human beneath the title. You succeeded. But at what cost? That depends on what happens next, doesn't it? The Dowager's shrewd eyes studied Clarissa. He loves you, you know. Truly loves you. Not the infatuation born from competition or wounded pride. How can you be certain? Because I've watched him these past months. He's not performing grief or loss, Clarissa. He's genuinely broken by the recognition of what he lost through his own failures. That kind of suffering isn't manufactured. Clarissa had no answer, only the confused tangle of her own feelings. As February gave way to March, the Dowager continued her slow recovery. Clarissa remained at Ashwell Park, unable to leave, while the older woman still needed her care. Alexander kept careful distance, inquiring about his mother's health, but never forcing his presence on Clarissa. She would catch glimpses of him in corridors or through windows, always looking worn and weary, but he honored the boundaries she had drawn months ago in the rain, on the first truly warm day of spring, when the Dowager felt strong enough to sit in her chair by the window. She declared herself sufficiently recovered that Clarissa might take a walk in the gardens. You've been trapped in this sick room for weeks, my dear. Go breathe fresh air. I insist. Bah! Clarissa suspected manipulation but could not refuse. The gardens of Ashwell Park burst with early spring flowers, daffodils and crocuses creating pools of colour after the winter grey. She walked familiar paths, memory overlaying present with ghosts of past conversations. She found Alexander in the rose garden, examining bushes that were just beginning to leaf. He looked up at her approach, surprise and something like hope flashing across his features before he controlled his expression. Miss Whitmore. Mother is well? Improving daily, Your Grace. Dr. Harrison is very pleased with her progress. Thanks to your care, no doubt. He paused, then said carefully, I did not expect you to stay so long. I'm grateful. I stayed for her, Grace, not for you. I know. The acknowledgement held no bitterness, only acceptance. But I'm grateful nonetheless. They stood in uncomfortable silence, years of history and months of separation weighing the air between them. Finally, Alexander spoke again. I've had considerable time to think these past months, about my failures, about what I should have done differently. I won't burden you with apologies you've already heard, or declarations I've already made, but I would like to say one thing, if you'll permit it. Clarissa nodded, not trusting her voice. You were right about everything. I saw you only when forced. I valued you only after my brother demonstrated your worth. I treated you abominably through ignorance that was inexcusable. Alexander's voice remained steady, but his eyes held raw honesty. I cannot change the past 3 years. I cannot pretend I recognized your value from the beginning. All I can offer is the truth that I see you now, completely and clearly, and what I see is extraordinary. Not because Christopher showed me, though he did, but because I finally opened my eyes and truly looked. That doesn't erase 3 years of invisibility. No, it doesn't. Nothing can. I was a fool, Clarissa. A blind, arrogant fool who thought duty was everything and feeling was weakness. I was wrong about that too. Feeling is what makes us human. And I forgot how to be human until you were gone. Clarissa felt tears threaten, but refused to let them fall. Why are you telling me this now? Because I need you to understand that my regard isn't born from competition or wounded pride. It's born from finally seeing clearly who you are. Your strength, your intelligence, your quiet competence, your capacity for loyalty despite every reason not to give it. You are remarkable, and I was too caught in my own rigidity to recognize it. He took a step closer, then stopped as though afraid she might flee. I'm not asking for anything. I have no right to ask. I only wanted you to know that loving you taught me what I should have known all along. That titles and duties mean nothing without someone to share them with. Someone who sees past the role to the man beneath. You love me? The words emerged as barely a whisper. Desperately. Completely. Too late, I know. But with everything I am. Clarissa looked at him, really looked, and saw what she had been too hurt and defensive to recognize. The Alexander standing before her was not the cold duke who had ignored her for years. This man showed vulnerability, acknowledged failure, offered truth without demands or expectations. He had changed, genuinely changed, and that transformation had cost him dearly. I don't know if I can trust this, she admitted. Trust you. Trust that your feelings won't evaporate once the longing for what you can't have fades. I understand. If I were you, I wouldn't trust me either. Alexander's voice held quiet resignation. All I can offer is time to prove my constancy, however long that takes, however you need it demonstrated. I'm not going anywhere, Clarissa. Whether you accept me or refuse me, whether you stay or leave, my feelings won't change. This isn't temporary. It's not novelty. It's simply the truth of who you are and what you mean to me. And if I say I need months to be certain, to watch and wait and test whether this is real, then I'll wait months, years if necessary. You deserve certainty, and I'll do whatever required to provide it. For the first time in months, Clarissa felt something like hope stirring beneath her protective defenses. Not certainty, not yet, but possibility. The chance that Alexander's transformation might be genuine, that the love he claimed might prove lasting. I cannot promise anything, she said carefully. I've rebuilt my life in London. I have responsibilities, commitments. I'm not asking you to abandon them. I'm only asking that you not close the door completely. Let me prove myself through actions, not just words. Very well. But I make no guarantees, Alexander. If you prove inconsistent, if your regard falters, I will leave and not return. Understood. The hope in his eyes nearly undid her resolve. May I write to you in London? You may, but I will respond honestly, and my honesty may not always be kind. I expect nothing less. The courtship that followed was unlike anything society had witnessed from the Duke of Northmere. Alexander wrote weekly letters that were not demands or declarations, but simple accounts of his days, his thoughts, his gradual learning of how to be human, rather than merely ducal. Clarissa responded with equal honesty, neither encouraging nor discouraging, simply allowing connection to develop naturally. He visited London monthly, requesting permission each time before calling at the Kensington household. He brought no extravagant gifts, only small tokens that showed attention. A book she had mentioned wanting, seeds for her favourite flowers, a watercolour of Ashwell Park in spring. He sat properly in the drawing room under Lady Kensington's knowing eye and made conversation that included genuine interest in her work and life. Christopher, visiting his brother in London, witnessed these efforts and sought out Clarissa. He's changed, he said simply, truly changed. I've never seen Alexander so focused on something beyond duty. Whatever you decide about him, know that his feelings are genuine. You approve? I want you happy, Clarissa. If Alexander makes you happy, then yes, I approve wholeheartedly. If he doesn't, then I'll help you send him packing. Summer arrived, and with it came Alexander's carefully worded invitation. Would Clarissa consider visiting Ashwell Park? His mother wished to see her, and he promised complete propriety, separate accommodations, no pressure or expectations. Clarissa accepted, and the week she spent in Kent revealed truths that months of letters had only hinted at. Alexander had transformed Ashwell Park in small but significant ways. The household ran with less rigid formality. He knew servants' names, inquired about their families. He smiled occasionally, a sight so unusual it startled long-time staff. He had, in short, become the man he should have been all along, and the change appeared permanent. On her final evening, they walked in the garden where so many crucial conversations had occurred. The roses bloomed profusely, filling the air with fragrance. I have one question, Clarissa said, as they paused beside a particularly lovely specimen. If I had never left, would you have changed? Alexander considered carefully before answering. Honestly, I don't know. Perhaps eventually, But it might have taken years rather than months. Losing you forced me to confront truths I'd been avoiding. Your absence taught me what your presence should have meant all along. That's not a comfortable answer. No. But it's truthful. He turned to face her fully. I wish I could say I would have seen you clearly without losing you first, but I can't claim that false virtue. All I can claim is that once forced to see, I looked deeply and never looked away again. Clarissa studied his face in the fading light. The strong features softened by genuine emotion, the blue eyes that now saw her completely. She thought of Lord Hastings' safe courtship, of the comfortable life he offered, and she thought of the past 6 months watching Alexander prove himself through consistent action rather than grand gestures. I don't want to be your redemption, she said quietly. I don't want to be the woman who saved you from yourself. You're not. You're the woman who woke me to the possibility of living rather than merely existing. There's a difference. Is there? I think so. Redemption suggests you fix something broken. You didn't fix me, Clarissa. You simply showed me what life could be when I stopped hiding behind duty. What I do with that knowledge is my choice and my responsibility, not yours. The distinction mattered, and Alexander's recognition of it mattered more. Clarissa felt the last of her defenses crumbling, not from pressure, but from accumulated evidence that this transformation was real, lasting, worthy of trust. Ask me again, she said. Ask you what? What you asked in the rain months ago. Understanding dawned in Alexander's expression, followed by something like fear. Clarissa, I won't trap you with a proposal you feel obligated to accept. You need to be certain. I am certain. Ask me. He dropped to one knee on the garden path, taking her hand with a gentleness that belied his size. Clarissa Whitmore, I see you. I have learned to see you clearly and completely. I love you not for what you can give me, but for who you are in your entirety. Will you marry me? Yes. The word emerged without hesitation, feeling right in a way nothing had felt right in months. Yes, I will marry you. The kiss that followed was gentle, reverent, and entirely proper for a garden where servants might pass. But it held promise of depth and feeling that neither had dared hope for months ago. The wedding took place 1 year to the day from the ball where everything had shifted. Christopher stood as Alexander's best man, his genuine happiness evident. The Dowager, fully recovered and radiating satisfaction, watched her eldest son marry the woman he had almost lost through his own blindness. Clarissa walked up the aisle of the parish church, wearing silk the colour of spring sky, and when Alexander turned to watch her approach, his expression held such unveiled love that several guests wept. They had chosen a long engagement deliberately, wanting certainty before binding themselves legally. That year had proven Alexander's constancy beyond doubt, transforming initial hope into solid trust, and trust into love that felt both earned and given freely. As they spoke their vows, Clarissa recognized that she was not becoming a duchess to rescue her from obscurity. She was becoming a duchess because she had chosen a man who had learned to see clearly and love truly, however belatedly that learning had come. That evening, as they stood together on the terrace of Ashwell Park, watching the moon rise over gardens she now owned as mistress rather than companion, Alexander pulled her close. I wasted 3 years, he said quietly. 3 years of not seeing you. I regret that profoundly. Don't. Clarissa turned in his arms to face him. Those 3 years taught me strength. They taught you to see. Perhaps we both needed them to become people capable of this. You're extraordinarily generous. I'm realistic. Perfect timing exists only in novels, Alexander. Real people stumble toward each other through mistakes and misunderstandings. What matters is that we found our way eventually. He kissed her then, thoroughly and improperly for a terrace where anyone might see, and Clarissa laughed against his mouth, the sound of a woman who had learned that invisibility was not her destiny, that love could come even from the most unlikely transformations, and that sometimes the greatest courage was allowing oneself to hope despite every reason not to. At Ashwell Park, the Duke and his new Duchess began their life together, built not on perfection but on hard-won understanding, genuine regard, and the recognition that seeing clearly is both gift and choice, and that choice, once made, can change everything. May you find in your own life what Clarissa found in hers. Someone who learns to see you clearly, who values your strength even when quietly given, and who proves through consistent action that love, however late it arrives, can be worth the wait. May you sleep knowing that transformation is possible, that growth matters more than perfection, and that being truly seen is worth every risk required to allow it.